Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Frances Hayes. I'm a 66-year-old widow, and for my entire life, I believed a mother's love should be unconditional. If you're watching this, please like and subscribe, because you are about to hear the story of how I learned that even unconditional love must have boundaries. For 5 years after my husband passed, I used my savings to pay for my son's rent, his car repairs, and even his wife's expensive tastes. I thought I was helping him build a future. But last week, when my savings finally ran low, my son screamed at me over the phone, "Your paycheck isn't enough. I demand you sell the house." He thought he was shouting at a poor, helpless widow who had nothing left to give. He had no idea what his father had left behind to protect me. A secret that was about to cost him everything. I want to know how far my story has traveled, so please tell me in the comments where you're listening from. The silence in the kitchen the next morning was heavier than 1,000 accusations. My cup of coffee sat untouched, its surface having long gone cold, a mirror to the chill that had settled deep in my heart since the phone call last night. Outside the window, the cheerful chirping of New Jersey robins felt like a cruel mockery, a soundtrack to a life that was no longer mine. My gaze drifted to Robert's old oak desk, tucked neatly in the corner of the living room. It had been his sanctuary. "Every answer you'll ever need is in these drawers, Frances," he used to say with a knowing smile. I'd always laughed it off, assuming he meant old warranties or tax returns. But now, standing on the precipice of a truth I couldn't yet face, I wondered if he had left me a map for this very storm. The storm had a name: Aiden, my son. His voice from last night's call still echoed in my ears, laced with an impatience that had become all too familiar. "Mom, the car's transmission is shot," he'd said, the feigned panic in his tone a poorly rehearsed performance. "The mechanic said it's an emergency repair. It's going to be $2,000. Without a second thought, my own voice had replied, the words worn smooth from years of repetition. "Of course, dear. I'll transfer it now." I didn't question the amount or the urgency. My son needed me, and I, his mother, would provide. It was the simple, unspoken contract of my life. Afterward, I had opened my banking app, my finger hesitating for a moment over the icon. The numbers on the screen stared back at me, stark and unforgiving. After the transfer, my savings, the cushion I had carefully built for my old age, had shriveled to a frighteningly small figure. The rotting porch steps, which I had promised myself I would finally get fixed this autumn, would have to endure another brutal New Jersey winter. The contractor's quote for $3,000, once a manageable expense, now seemed like an insurmountable mountain. It's what mothers do, I told myself, a hollow mantra to soothe the growing ache of sacrifice. You give until it hurts, and then you give a little more. This morning, as I moved through the quiet house, every object was a ghost of Robert. His favorite armchair in the living room held an indentation that 5 years of emptiness hadn't erased. The faint, pleasant scent of sawdust and old paper still clung to his study. Loneliness was a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, making each step a little heavier. To distract myself from the silence and the memories, I picked up my tablet, intending to scroll mindlessly through the curated happiness of other people's lives. And then I saw it. I froze, the tablet heavy in my hands. It was a new post from Chloe, my daughter-in-law, uploaded just hours after Aiden's desperate call. There she was, beaming, posing in front of a boutique I knew I could never afford to even walk past. In the crook of her arm was a new handbag, a confection of buttery, cream-colored leather with a gleaming gold clasp that caught the light. The caption was a simple heart emoji, but the triumphant smile on her face told a much longer story. My heart stopped. I'd seen a bag just like it in a glossy magazine just last week while waiting at the doctor's office. Its price was printed in small, elegant font right beside it, $2,000. Exactly. The number seared itself into my brain. As if summoned by the sickening realization, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text message from Aiden. My hands trembled as I reached for it, a cold dread washing over me. The words on the screen were simple, chilling in their casual cruelty. "Thanks, Mom. The car is all fixed." The lie was so blatant, so utterly devoid of care, it took my breath away. Aiden's lie echoed in my head, a venomous whisper that refused to fade as I tended to the roses. Each snip of the pruning shears was a sharp, angry punctuation mark in my thoughts. This garden was mine and Robert's. We had planted these bushes together on a sunny Saturday in early May, our hands deep in the rich New Jersey soil, our dreams taking root alongside them. I remembered Robert's words, spoken one afternoon as we sat on the porch watching a young Aiden chase fireflies across the lawn. "He's a good boy, Francis, but he's easily led. Make sure he marries a good woman," he had said, his voice laced with a quiet foresight I was only now beginning to understand. One who sees the value in his heart, not just what's in his wallet. His words now felt like a prophecy, a warning I had failed to heed. My peaceful Sunday afternoon was shattered by the sound of Aiden's sleek sedan pulling into the driveway, its tires crunching on the gravel with an expensive sound. He and Chloe were making an unannounced visit. Chloe emerged from the passenger side, a vision in a floral sundress that whispered of money, her smile as bright and brittle as glass. "Francis, your garden is just lovely," she chirped, her tone a little too high, a little too bright. Her eyes, however, did not linger on the blooming roses. Instead, they scanned the porch swing's peeling paint and the slightly worn welcome mat with a flicker of something that looked like disdain. Once inside, the performance continued. Aiden, looking tired and pointedly avoiding my gaze, sank into his father's armchair and immediately became engrossed in the football game on television, creating a wall of noise between us. Chloe, however, was a whirlwind of false enthusiasm, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floors as she made a show of admiring my home. "My, the house is so cozy," she remarked. And I knew instantly that she was using the word as a synonym for small and outdated. She ran a perfectly manicured finger along the top of a bookshelf, a subtle check for dust that did not go unnoticed. Then she launched into a story that was clearly rehearsed. "You know, my friend Jennifer's parents just sold their big house in the countryside," she began, her voice casual as she examined a porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece. "They moved into a luxury condo downtown, and honestly, they've never been happier. They have a concierge, a pool, a gym, no more mowing the lawn, no more worrying about a leaky roof." She turned to me, her smile wide and predatory. Total freedom. I held my cup of iced tea, the condensation cold against my fingers. I knew this was not an idle story. This was the opening salvo. "I do worry about you." "Mom," Aiden mumbled, his eyes still fixed on the screen, his voice laced with a guilt he was trying to disguise as concern. "All alone in this big place. The stairs are steep. What if you fell?" Chloe pounced on the opening like a cat on a mouse. "He's right, Francis. We worry constantly." She reached into her expensive handbag, the very one from the photograph, and pulled out a stack of glossy brochures. She fanned them out on my coffee table, their vibrant images of smiling seniors playing bingo and swimming in pristine pools, a stark, insulting contrast to my quiet, memory-filled life. "I just picked these up for you to look at," she said, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "These are the best retirement communities in the state. They have 24/7 nursing care, social clubs, everything you could possibly need." I stared at the brochures, at the smiling, staged perfection, and felt a cold fury begin to build deep in my stomach. This was no longer a hint. This was an eviction notice wrapped in a pretty bow. They were trying to package up my life and ship it off to a holding pen for the elderly. When they finally left, Aiden gave me a brief, almost reluctant hug, his cheek barely brushing mine. "Just think about it, Mom," he whispered, the words feeling like a betrayal. "We only want what's best for you." I stood on the porch, watching their car disappear down the street. The air felt heavy, suffocating. As I turned to go back inside, something caught my eye, tucked just under the rim of the terracotta geranium pot by the door. I bent down and pulled it out. It was a business card. Thick and embossed, cool to the touch. It read, "John Miller, Premium Real Estate Services." He thought I hadn't seen, but I had seen everything. The real estate agent's business card felt slick and cold in my hand, a tangible piece of their conspiracy. I didn't sleep that Sunday night. I just sat in Robert's armchair, the card on the table in front of me, and watched the hours tick by on the grandfather clock. Every tick was a reminder of my last anniversary with Robert in this house, just a few months before he passed. He had taken my hands in his own hands warm and calloused from a lifetime of hard work, and looked around the living room with a deep contentment. "This house is our soul, Francis," he had said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's everything we built together. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." At the time, I had thought his words were merely sentimental. Now I understood they were a warning. Monday morning arrived not with the promise of a new week, but with a sense of suffocating dread. The October air outside was crisp, but inside my house the atmosphere was heavy and stale. I moved through the rooms mechanically, making coffee I didn't want, tidying cushions that were already neat. I was waiting. I didn't know for what, but I knew it was coming. The phone rang just after 9 o'clock. It was Aiden. There was no preamble, no gentle inquiry about my weekend. His voice was tight, strung with an aggressive urgency that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Mom," he said, skipping any greeting, "Chloe and I have a serious investment opportunity. It's a real estate venture, a sure thing, but we have to act now. We need $50,000. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. $50,000. He spoke of it as if he were asking to borrow a cup of sugar. After the lies about the car, after the brochures, after the business card, this was his next move, a frontal assault. I walked over to the sink, gripping the cool porcelain edge to steady myself. For the first time in his 35 years of life, a lifetime of automatic compliance gave way to a sliver of cold resistance. All the sacrifices, the canceled repairs, the lonely meals coalesced into a single quiet word. "No." I said it again, my voice stronger this time, firmer, a sound I hadn't heard myself make in years. "I can't, Aiden. I don't have that kind of money left. I've given you too much already." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. A void so profound it felt like a physical presence. I could hear him breathing, short, sharp intakes of air. He was not used to being denied. The carefully constructed facade of the concerned son began to crack, and what lay beneath was ugly and raw. "What do you mean you don't have it?" he finally spat, the words sharp with disbelief. "You're sitting in a $500,000 house and you're telling me you don't have it?" "This house is where I live, Aiden. It is not your personal ATM," I said, my own voice trembling now with a nascent anger. That was the final straw. The explosion was instantaneous and brutal, his voice no longer pleading but dripping with a venomous rage that I had never heard from him before, cut through the phone like a serrated knife. "That little bit of pension isn't enough. I demand you sell the house." The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the linoleum floor. The line went dead, but his words continued to scream in my ears, echoing in the sudden, terrible silence of my kitchen. I sank to the cold floor, my legs no longer able to support me, the world unraveling into a blur of shock and profound heartbreak. My son. My boy. He had demanded it, as if he had any right. But through the blur of my tears, my eyes found Robert's desk in the other room, solid, unmoving, waiting. It was time to find the answers. There were no more tears left to cry, only a cold, hollow space where my heart used to be. The echo of Aiden's shout had faded, but the devastation remained, a permanent crack in the foundation of my world. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, moving through the rooms of my house like a ghost, each object a painful reminder of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The house, once my sanctuary, now felt like an echo chamber, amplifying my son's cruel demand. But as darkness fell over the quiet New Jersey street, something shifted within me. The grief, so raw and all-consuming, began to burn, the edges curling up, turning from sorrow into a slow, simmering anger. It was a feeling I hadn't felt in years, a cold resolve that began to push back against the despair. I thought of Robert. I thought of his unwavering strength, his quiet wisdom, and his fierce, protective love. And then, like a flicker of light in the oppressive darkness, I remembered a conversation from years ago, shortly after his diagnosis. He had been organizing his papers in his study, a task he undertook with solemn precision. He had called me in, his face serious, and handed me a small, ornate brass key, tucked inside an old velvet ring box from a long-forgotten anniversary. "This is for a rainy day, Francis," he had said, his eyes holding a gravity I didn't understand at the time. "I hope you never have to use it, but if you do, you'll know it's time." I had put the box away in my jewelry case, dismissing it as one of his sentimental quirks. Today, the rain was a hurricane. After a long, sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, I rose before dawn. The house was still and dark, holding its breath. I walked into Robert's study, a room I had barely touched since he passed, leaving his books and papers just as he had left them. A fine layer of dust covered everything, a testament to the 5 years he'd been gone. It felt like trespassing on sacred ground. The faint scent of his pipe tobacco and old paper still lingered in the air. I went to my bedroom, my heart a heavy stone in my chest, and retrieved the small velvet box. The key was cool and solid in my palm, a tangible link to my husband's foresight. I knelt before his old oak desk and inserted the key into the lock of the bottom-most drawer, one I had never seen him open. It turned with a soft, satisfying click that seemed to break the spell of my grief. The drawer slid open silently. Inside there was no clutter, no forgotten trinkets. Instead, it was filled with a series of immaculate leather-bound folders, each labeled in Robert's neat, precise handwriting. Investments, insurance, property deeds. And on top of them all lay a single thick cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in his familiar, steady script. "For Francis, my love." My hands trembled as I broke the wax seal. The letter inside was written on his personal stationery, dated just a month before he died. "My dearest Francis, if you are reading this, it means the rainy day I feared has finally arrived. I hope with all my heart that I am wrong, but I have seen the seeds of weakness in our son, and I fear the influence of those who do not share our values. I did not want to burden you with my worries while I was alive, but I could not leave you unprotected. There is a man you must see. His name is David Chen. He is my oldest friend and my most trusted legal counsel. He holds my final wishes and knows what must be done if Aiden ever loses his way. Trust him, Francis. Trust him as you trusted me. All my love forever, Robert." Tucked behind the letter was a crisp, elegant business card. It read, "David Chen, Esquire, Estate and Trust Law." My breath caught in my throat. This was more than a clue, it was a plan, a final act of love and protection from beyond the grave. For the first time in days, a flicker of something other than despair ignited within me. It was hope, fierce and bright. The next morning, my hand was steady as I dialed the number on the card. A professional voice answered, "Law offices of David Chen." "Hello?" I said, my voice clearer than it had been all week. "My name is Frances Hayes. I was a client of Mr. Robert Hayes. I need to speak with Mr. Chen." There was a brief pause on the other end, the sound of a keyboard clicking softly. "Mrs. Hayes," the secretary said, a note of recognition in her voice that sent a shiver down my spine. "One moment, please. Mr. Chen mentioned he has been expecting your call." The scent of old books and polished wood in David Chen's office was the first real comfort I had felt in days. His downtown office wasn't ostentatious, but everything from the heavy oak desk to the leather-bound law books lining the walls spoke of quiet, unshakable competence. He was a man about my age, with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Robert was the most honorable man I ever knew," David began, after handing me a cup of warm chamomile tea. "He once walked away from a deal that would have made him rich because the other party was trying to cheat a small family business. He told me, 'My integrity isn't for sale, David, and neither is my family's peace of mind.'" The memory hung in the air, a testament to the man I had lost and the reason I was here. With my voice low and sometimes faltering, I recounted the entire sordid tale. The constant requests for money, Chloe's taunting photo of the handbag, the brochures for retirement homes, and finally, Aiden's brutal demand over the phone. David listened without interruption, his expression hardening from one of gentle sympathy to one of grim resolve. When I finished, he didn't offer empty platitudes. Instead, he stood, walked over to a large steel safe in the corner of the room, and spun the dial with a practiced hand. He retrieved a thick, leather-bound portfolio tied with a red ribbon. "This," he said, placing it gently on the desk between us, "is Robert's complete last will and testament. What was read at the funeral 5 years ago was a simplified version, as per his instructions." He untied the ribbon and opened the portfolio, his fingers finding a page marked with a small, discreet tab. "Robert foresaw this possibility, Frances. He hoped it would never come to this, but he prepared for it." He cleared his throat. "He included something we called the respect clause." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. David began to read in a clear, measured voice. "I, Robert Hayes, hereby stipulate that the disbursement of the primary trust fund, valued at $5 million to my son, Aiden Hayes, shall be contingent upon the following condition. Said inheritance shall be rendered immediately and permanently null and void if, in the sole judgment of my executor, David Chen, Aiden Hayes is found to have engaged in actions causing severe emotional distress or exerted undue financial pressure upon his mother, Frances Hayes." $5 million. The number was so vast, so alien it didn't seem real. We had lived so simply. Robert had never said a word. The room spun for a moment. All those years, he had been quietly building a fortress to protect me. I looked at David, my mind racing, the pieces clicking into place with a terrifying, exhilarating clarity. "So, if I can prove it?" I whispered, the words barely forming. "Yes," David said, his eyes meeting mine, sharp and focused. "But we need proof, Frances, irrefutable proof, and I know exactly where we need to start." I returned home, but I was no longer the broken woman who had left that morning. I was a warrior, steeling herself for battle. The familiar comfort of my house now felt different, transformed from a place of grief into a command center. My old smartphone lay on the kitchen counter, a simple device I had mostly used for calling Aiden or looking at pictures he would occasionally send. For years, it was just a phone, a lifeline to my son. Now I saw it for what it was about to become, my most important weapon. That evening, as promised, David called. His voice was calm and methodical, the voice of a man who navigated chaos for a living, and it was an immediate anchor for my swirling emotions. "Frances," he began, "from this moment forward, every interaction is potential evidence. You need to be strong, but you also need to be smart. Remember, New Jersey is a one-party consent state. As long as you are part of the conversation, you can legally record it. I have emailed you a link to a simple recording app. Install it, record every call, save every text message. We are building a fortress brick by brick, and their own words will be the mortar. It felt duplicitous, a betrayal of the maternal instinct to trust. It felt like spying on my own son. But the woman who had trusted blindly was gone, shattered on the kitchen floor 2 days ago. In her place was a woman fighting for her life and her husband's legacy. I followed his instructions, my fingers surprisingly steady as I navigated the unfamiliar technology, the small red record icon appearing on my screen like a single drop of blood. The very next day, Aiden called. His timing was impeccable, as if he sensed my resolve wavering and needed to reinforce his attack. His tone was a complete 180-degree turn from the fury of our last conversation. It was the soft, penitent voice of the little boy who used to apologize after breaking a vase, a voice designed to melt my heart and bypass my reason. "Mom," he began, the words laced with a carefully crafted remorse. "I am so sorry about the other day. I was completely out of line. I've just been under so much pressure at work and I took it out on you. It was unforgivable." I took a deep, silent breath, picturing David's instructions in my mind. Stay calm. Be the mother he expects. I pressed the record button. "It's all right, Aiden," I replied, my voice a perfect imitation of the endlessly forgiving mother I had always been. "We all say things we don't mean when we're stressed." "That's the thing, Mom," he continued, sensing his advantage. The silken web of manipulation being woven with expert care. "I want to make sure you never have to feel that kind of stress. I've been thinking, you shouldn't have to worry about finances at all. There are ways to simplify things, to make sure you're taken care of." "What do you mean, dear?" I asked, playing my part. And then he made his first mistake. "In fact," he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, "if you just sign a power of attorney for me to handle the sale of the house, everything would be so much simpler for you." The words hung in the air between us, a direct confession of his ultimate goal. He must have heard his own blunder because he scrambled to correct himself. "I mean, to handle your assets, Mom, to help you manage things, so you don't have to worry." But it was too late. The slip was made. The mask had fallen, if only for a fraction of a second. Later that afternoon, my phone pinged with a barrage of texts from Chloe. "Hi, Francis, thinking of you. Just saw the most adorable little cottage for sale online. It would be perfect for one person. So cozy." A link followed. Then another text. "It's just so important to us that you are happy and secure in your golden years." Each word was a drop of poison coated in sugar. I saved them all. The call with Aiden ended. I stared at my phone, at the saved recording file. It was a neat little digital line that contained his entire deceitful performance. I had my first brick. The game had truly begun. The afternoon rain washed the streets of our neighborhood clean, but it couldn't rinse away the tension that clung to the air inside my house. I was watching the droplets trace paths down the window pane when I saw a familiar figure hurrying across the lawn. An umbrella held tight against the wind. It was Eleanor Gable from next door. I felt a knot form in my stomach, remembering the way she'd looked at me with worried eyes after Aiden and Chloe's last few visits. A silent question in her gaze that I had never been ready to answer. I opened the door before she could knock. "Eleanor," I said, forcing a smile. "Come in out of this weather." "I saw you were home alone and thought you could use some company," she said, handing me a plate of still warm oatmeal raisin cookies. "And some of these." We sat in the living room, the comforting aroma of cinnamon and baked oats filling the space between us. For a while, we engaged in the easy small talk of longtime neighbors, the weather, her grandchildren, my roses, but I could see something weighing on her mind. Finally, she set her teacup down and looked at me directly. Francis, I don't mean to pry, but I'm worried about you. I held my breath. Last week, she continued, her voice dropping. It was on Tuesday evening. I was taking out the recycling and Aiden and Chloe were in their car, right in your driveway. They were arguing. She paused, as if weighing her words. I couldn't hear everything, but Chloe was furious. She shouted something I couldn't forget. She said, "You have to get her to sign the papers before Thanksgiving, Aiden, or we'll lose everything." The cookie I was holding crumbled in my hand. Lose everything. Thanksgiving. The pieces were slotting together with a horrible, sickening click. Eleanor leaned forward. "That's not all, Francis. After Robert passed, my son David installed a new security camera for me. It's small, but it has a clear view of your driveway. It records both video and audio." My heart hammered against my ribs. I stared at her, unable to speak. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small black object, a USB flash drive. "I wasn't sure if I should get involved," she said softly, her kind eyes filled with a pained resolve. "But Robert was a good man, and you are a good woman. You don't deserve this." She pressed the USB drive into my palm. Its plastic casing was smooth and ordinary, but it felt as heavy as a stone. "I don't know if this is of any use," she said, "but I thought you should have it." After Eleanor left, I stood in the quiet of my living room for a long time, the USB drive clutched in my hand. With trembling fingers, I walked over to Robert's desk and plugged it into the side of my laptop. A single video file appeared on the screen. My hand hovered over the trackpad, hesitating for a split second before I clicked. The video flickered to life, the image clear, the audio crisp. This wasn't just evidence, this was a bombshell. With the video evidence safely stored on my laptop, a new kind of strength pulsed through me. It was the potent, clarifying power of certainty. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet preparation, the storm within me perfectly concealed by an exterior of calm. My thoughts kept drifting back to Thanksgiving's past, to the warm, bustling kitchen filled with the scent of Robert's sage and sausage stuffing and the sound of his deep, happy laugh as he carved the turkey. Those were days of genuine gratitude, of a family bound by love, not by obligation or deceit. This year, the feast would be very different. The call came on Thursday evening, exactly 1 week before Thanksgiving. It was Chloe, her voice an impossibly sweet confection of concern. "Francis, I was just thinking about you," she began. "Aiden and I were talking, and we feel just terrible that the family has been so distant lately. We thought, what better way to bring everyone together than to have a big traditional Thanksgiving dinner?" I held the phone, my recording app silently running. "That's a lovely thought, Chloe," I said, my voice carefully measured to sound touched, perhaps a little fragile. "And we thought, what better place than your house?" she continued, the bait being laid. "It's the heart of the family, after all. We'll handle everything, of course. The cooking, the cleaning. We just want to fill the house with love again." She paused for dramatic effect. "We were thinking of inviting Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, too. It's been so long since everyone was under one roof." Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim, the family's self-appointed judges, quick with their opinions and even quicker with their disapproval. The strategy was so transparent, it was almost pathetic. They planned to use them as a jury, to publicly shame me into submission. The old Frances would have been terrified. The new Frances saw the stage being set perfectly for her. "Chloe, that sounds wonderful," I said, injecting a slight tremble into my voice. "I've been so lonely. To have the house full again would mean the world to me." I could almost hear the triumphant smirk on the other end of the line. She passed the phone to Aiden. "Mom, that's great news," he said, his voice booming with false cheer. He believed I was finally caving, that their campaign of pressure and guilt had worked. "It's going to be just like old times. And after dinner," he added, his voice dropping to a more serious, man-of-the-house tone. "We can all have an important family talk. about the future. The moment had arrived. The final piece of the trap was set. "Of course, Aiden," I replied, my voice smooth as silk but with an edge of steel he was too arrogant to detect. "I think that's an excellent idea. In fact, I have a few important things I'd like to share with the family, too." There was a split second of silence on his end, a brief, almost imperceptible hesitation. The confident rhythm of his breathing hitched. It was the sound of a predator who had just heard a twig snap in the darkness, a flicker of unease in a plan he thought was flawless. The days leading up to Thanksgiving passed in a strange, artificial calm, a quiet so profound it felt like the deep breath a storm takes before it breaks. I busied myself with the rituals of the holiday, polishing the silverware until it gleamed, airing out the heavy linen tablecloth that held the ghosts of Thanksgivings past, and meticulously planning a menu I had no appetite for. I was moving through my home like an actress learning her lines on a set, my every action deliberate and detached. On the mantelpiece, our wedding photograph, taken on a bright June day in 1978, seemed to watch my every move. I'd pause and look at Robert's young, hopeful face. His arm wrapped securely around my 25-year-old waist, his eyes full of a future he thought he could control. "I'm doing this to protect your legacy, my love," I whispered to his smiling image, "to honor the man who worked so hard to build this life, a life now threatened by the very son he had so adored." On the Tuesday before the holiday, I drove downtown for my final strategy meeting with David Chen. His office, with its scent of leather and old paper, had become my sanctuary, an anchor in the swirling chaos of my world. He greeted me not with the pitying glances I had grown to dread, but with a quiet, professional respect that fortified my resolve. Without a word, I laid out the arsenal I had collected on his polished mahogany desk, the printed-out text messages from Chloe, the memory card containing the audio files of Aiden's manipulative calls, and finally, Eleanor Gable's small black USB drive. "This is everything," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. David spent the next hour in silent, focused review. It was like watching a master craftsman at work. He listened to the audio recordings through his headphones, his face impassive, but I saw a muscle tighten in his jaw as Aiden's voice wheedled and then threatened. He scrolled through the text messages, his brow furrowing at Chloe's cloying, poisonous sweetness. Then he plugged the USB drive into his computer. He watched the video from Eleanor's camera once, then a second time, the tinny audio of Chloe's voice echoing in the quiet office. "You have to get her to sign the papers before Thanksgiving, Aiden, or we'll lose everything." He finally pushed his chair back and looked up at me, his eyes like polished steel. "Francis," he said, his voice low but ringing with absolute certainty, "this is not just enough. This is a slam dunk. The level of premeditation, the clear financial motive, the pattern of causing emotional distress. It's all here. It is undeniable." He turned to his credenza, opened a locked drawer, and pulled out a thick, professionally bound document. "I've taken the liberty of preparing the official declaration. This document, once I sign it in my capacity as executor, will legally enact the respect clause and formally, irrevocably disinherit Aiden from the $5 million trust." A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost buckled my knees. "So what happens now?" "Now," David said, leaning forward. His hands clasped on the desk. "We plan the final act. They have foolishly chosen the stage for us, your Thanksgiving dinner. We will let them play out their sordid little scene in front of their hand-picked audience. When is the best time for me to make my entrance?" We discussed the timing with the precision of generals planning an invasion. They would eat. They would feel bloated and confident. Aiden would make his grand, self-pitying speech. And just as he was about to present the papers for me to sign, David would arrive. The doorbell would ring at precisely 7:30 p.m. As I stood to leave, the plan set in stone, David asked one last question. "Should I come with you, Francis? I can be there from the beginning for moral support." I looked at him. The kind, steady friend Robert had left to watch over me. And for the first time in this whole ordeal, I felt the full measure of my own power return. "No, thank you, David," I said, my voice clear and certain, the voice of a woman in complete control. "This is my stage. You just need to arrive in time to bring down the curtain." That night, the eve of Thanksgiving, as I lay in bed, my phone lit up with one final text message. It was from Chloe. Her words glowed on the screen, dripping with smug, unknowing irony. "Tomorrow will be a memorable day, won't it, Francis?" I smiled, a slow, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes, and typed back my reply. "Oh, it certainly will be, dear. No one is ever going to forget it." On Thanksgiving morning, the fourth Thursday of November, I woke with a preternatural calm. The storm that had raged inside me for weeks had passed, leaving behind a quiet, resolute stillness. There was no anxiety, no fear, only the placid certainty of a captain who has charted her course through a hurricane and now simply waits for the winds to shift. In the kitchen, the early morning light streamed in, illuminating the familiar space where I began the ritual of preparing the turkey. I reached for the old, stained recipe card. My mother's elegant cursive faded from decades of use. I rubbed the bird's skin with softened butter, sage, and thyme, the earthy aroma filling the room. This was the same recipe I had made every year since Aiden was a boy, the one he used to declare was the best in the entire world. As I worked, my hands moving with an ageless rhythm, I felt a pang of sorrow. It wasn't for me. It was for him. This felt like a final offering, a silent farewell to the unconditional love he was so willing to trade for a pile of bricks and mortar. I worked alone, savoring the solitude, the methodical chopping of celery and onions, a comforting percussion. This was the last time my home would feel truly mine, untainted by their corrosive greed. They began arriving just after 2 p.m., a staggered procession of actors ready for their performance. Aiden and Chloe were first, their arms laden with expensive store-bought side dishes they presented as if they were humble offerings. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom!" Aiden's voice boomed, enveloping me in a hug that felt both theatrical and suffocating. Chloe followed, her smile stretched tight across her face. "The house smells divine, Francis. You always outdo yourself." Over my shoulder, they exchanged a quick, triumphant glance. A flash of shared conspiracy they were certain I was too grief-stricken to notice. Shortly after, Aunt Carol and Uncle Jim arrived, their faces arranged into masks of somber concern. They were the reinforcements, the jury of public opinion my son had summoned. Dinner was an exercise in carefully orchestrated tension. The clinking of my best silverware against the good china was the only sharp sound in a room thick with unspoken agendas. Aunt Carol, a master of the passive-aggressive compliment, began the assault. "Francis, dear, you look tired," she cooed across the table, her eyes filled with pity. "Cooking all this by yourself. It must be so exhausting for you." Uncle Jim, ever her echo, chimed in. "A big house like this, it's a lot of responsibility for one person. Robert would have wanted you to be comfortable, to take it easy." Aiden nodded gravely from his seat at the head of the table, his father's seat, playing the part of the devoted, worried son to perfection. I simply smiled, a serene, placid smile that I knew was unnerving them. "Oh, I'm managing just fine," I said lightly, my voice even. "I find that keeping busy is good for the soul." The conversation continued in this vein, a slow, circling attack disguised as loving concern, each question a gentle prod designed to corner me. Finally, as I rose to clear the plates for the pumpkin pie, Aiden stood. He tapped his fork against his crystal wine glass. The clear, high-pitched ring cut through the low murmur of conversation, a sound as sharp and deliberate as a judge's gavel. The table fell silent. Chloe looked up at him with undisguised adoration. My relatives leaned in. Their faces a mixture of curiosity and morbid anticipation. His face was a mask of solemn sincerity. "If I could have everyone's attention," he began, his voice filled with a false emotion that made my stomach clench. "There's something important I need to say." The room held its breath. All eyes were on him. I took a slow, deep breath, my hands resting on the back of my chair. The curtain was about to rise. Aiden's voice filled the sudden silence, oozing a false sincerity that coated every word in a sickeningly sweet layer of hypocrisy. "I just want to say," he began, raising his glass in a toast, his eyes scanning the faces of our relatives, a politician seeking consensus. "How wonderful it is to have everyone here. Thanksgiving is about family. It's about the bonds that hold us together and the sacrifices we make for each other." I watched him, my face a neutral mask, but my mind replayed the recording of his voice, raw and furious, demanding I sell the house. I remembered the lie about the $2,000 car repair that had magically transformed into a designer handbag for his wife. This performance was nothing new. It was just a more public stage, with a larger, more easily swayed audience. He let his words hang in the air for a moment, a master of the dramatic pause, before continuing. His gaze, heavy with manufactured emotion, swept across the table and finally settled on me. His expression shifted into one of profound, theatrical concern, a look he had perfected over the past few months. And that's why it's so hard to see someone we love struggling. "Mom," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing everyone to lean in, "we are all so worried about you." Aunt Carol, ever the willing participant in family drama, nodded sagely, her fork paused mid-air, her expression a perfect mirror of feigned sympathy. Uncle Jim, a man whose opinions were as rigid as his posture, grunted in agreement. The jury was ready, and they had already been primed. "This house," Aiden said, gesturing around the room that held every memory of my life with Robert, from our children's first steps to our final goodbye, holds so many beautiful memories. But let's be honest, it's also a tremendous burden. The upkeep on a place this old, the stairs that get steeper every year, the loneliness. We can't stand by and watch you wear yourself out. You've worked your whole life. You deserve to rest, to be taken care of." The trap was so elegantly sprung, I almost had to admire its cruel craftsmanship. He was painting my independence as a weakness, my home as a prison. He wasn't the greedy son demanding an asset. He was the loving caregiver, forced to make a difficult decision for his frail, stubborn mother. The narrative he was weaving was perfect, each word a carefully chosen thread designed to isolate me and portray me as a pitiable, irrational old woman. And then he moved in for the kill. He put his glass down, the sound echoing in the tense quiet. His voice, now laced with a pained frustration, became the voice of a martyr, a son burdened by a mother's irrationality. "We've tried to talk about this privately," he said, the lie so bold it was breathtaking. "But sometimes family needs to come together to help one of its own see what's best. Mom, with all the love in my heart, you're being selfish. You're clinging to the past, and in doing so, you are holding back the future of this family, the future of your potential grandchildren." Chloe, on cue, placed a hand on his arm, her eyes welling up with crocodile tears, a perfect portrait of the supportive, long-suffering wife. The air grew thick with a collective, unspoken judgment aimed directly at me. I could feel their eyes on me, the weight of their disapproval. They saw a confused old woman, a problem to be solved. "Mom," he said, his voice now thick with manufactured emotion, his eyes glistening under the dining room lights as he delivered his final devastating line. "We love you, but you can't let your stubbornness ruin the future of this entire family." Every eye in the room turned to me. They were waiting for the tears. They were waiting for me to break, to crumble under the weight of their united front, to finally give in and surrender my home and my dignity. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I let the silence stretch, letting their judgment hang in the air like a foul odor. Then I simply held his gaze, my own eyes clear and steady, and asked a single quiet question that shattered his entire performance. "Which future is that, Aiden? The one built on your debts?" My question hung in the air. A single sharp stone dropped into a pool of placid deceit. The perfect, rehearsed script Aiden had been following was in tatters. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the confident orator of a moment ago replaced by a boy caught in a lie. A flush crawled up his neck, a telltale sign of his anger and embarrassment I knew from his childhood. Chloe shot him a panicked, furious glance, but I kept my eyes locked on my son, my gaze unwavering. I would not let him look away. "Let's see," I continued, my voice still deceptively calm, as if I were simply trying to recall a grocery list. "There was the $2,000 for the car's transmission just last month, the one that was so urgent, the one that paid for your wife's new handbag, and before that, the $1,500 for that business conference in Boston in September. Tell me, Aiden, how was Boston? Was it a productive trip?" He stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking anywhere but at me, seeking an escape that wasn't there. That's none of your business. Those are my finances." "Are they?" I asked softly, letting the question hang. "Or are they mine?" The tension in the room was a physical thing, a pressure building against the walls. Aunt Carol shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her judgmental expression now one of confusion. Uncle Jim cleared his throat, a loud, grating sound in the silence. Chloe was pale, her perfectly applied lipstick suddenly looking garish against her ashen skin. And then a sound cut through the suffocating quiet, as clean and decisive as a judge's gavel. Ding-dong. Every head in the room jerked toward the front door. The timing was so perfect, so theatrical, it could only have been orchestrated. I remembered the moment I had first called David, the circle now closing. A small, knowing smile touched my lips. "Oh," I said, my voice light, almost cheerful. "That must be our final guest." Before anyone could move, I rose from my chair and walked to the door. I opened it to reveal David Chen, his face serious, his posture impeccable in a dark, tailored suit. He held a handsome leather briefcase in one hand, and his presence immediately commanded the room's attention. He stepped inside, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but authoritative, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces at the table. "I apologize for the intrusion on your Thanksgiving dinner. My name is David Chen." He paused, letting his eyes rest for a moment on Aiden. "I am here on behalf of the late Robert Hayes." Aiden and Chloe froze, their faces a mask of disbelief. Aiden was the first to find his voice, a mixture of outrage and confusion. "The will? The will was read 5 years ago. You have no business here." "Oh, not all of it," David replied smoothly. He walked over to the now cleared dining table, placed his briefcase upon it, and opened the brass latches with 2 sharp clicks that echoed in the silent room. Robert was a very thorough man. "There is a special clause," David said, his voice now filling the room, leaving no space for interruption. "A clause that is only activated under very specific circumstances. And tonight, Mr. Hayes, those circumstances have been met." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Even the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to have paused, caught in the web of tension that David Chen had woven with his words. This was it, Robert's final act of protection, a plan set in motion years ago, was about to unfold. I thought of my husband, of his quiet strength, and the profound love that had driven him to shield me even from beyond the grave. David cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. He read directly from the document in his hand. Article 4, Section B, Subsection 1, henceforth known as the Respect Clause. It is my final and binding directive that the principal of the Hayes Family Trust shall only be disbursed to my son, Aiden Hayes, upon the condition that he continues to provide his mother, Frances Hayes, with the love, respect, and emotional support befitting a son. Should my executor determine, based on credible evidence, that Aiden Hayes has engaged in a pattern of behavior causing his mother severe emotional distress or has exerted undue financial pressure upon her, this clause is to be considered breached. Upon such a breach, Aiden Hayes' claim to the entirety of the trust and all associated assets is to be considered permanently and irrevocably null and void. A collective gasp rippled around the room. Aiden's face was a mask of disbelief. "This is insane. He never told me about this." "He didn't have to," David said coolly. "Now, as to the matter of credible evidence." He opened his briefcase and took out a small laptop. First, he played the audio files. The room was filled with the sound of Aiden's voice, cajoling, then demanding, then shouting. My own voice was a quiet counterpoint of resistance. When the recording of him blurting out his plan to handle the sale of the house played, Aunt Carol shot him a look of pure shock. Next, David connected the laptop to the large television screen in the living room. "And finally," he said, "a piece of evidence provided by a concerned neighbor." He clicked a file. The screen flickered to life, showing the grainy black and white image of my driveway. And there they were, Aiden and Chloe in their car. The tinny amplified audio of Chloe's voice filled the room, sharp and venomous. "You have to get her to sign the papers before Thanksgiving, Aiden, or we'll lose everything." Chloe let out a small, strangled scream. Aiden jumped to his feet. "That's illegal. You can't record us." "On the contrary," David stated calmly, "it was recorded on private property by the property owner, and it is perfectly admissible in determining the fulfillment of the terms of this will, which brings me to my final duty." He stood to his full height, his presence dominating the room. As the appointed executor of the estate of Robert Hayes, having reviewed these incontrovertible proofs of severe emotional distress and undue financial pressure, I hereby declare that Aiden Hayes has fundamentally breached the respect clause. He looked directly at my son, his voice leaving no room for appeal. "Your inheritance is null and void." Chloe shrieked, a raw animal sound of pure desperation. Aiden collapsed back into his chair as if his bones had turned to dust, his face as white as the tablecloth. "No," he whispered, shaking his head in frantic denial. "No, it can't be." "Oh, but it can," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. It was the first time I had spoken since David arrived. I looked at my son, at the ruins of the man he had become, and felt not anger, but a vast, empty sadness. Your father was always a man of great foresight. I then swept my gaze over the shocked faces of my relatives and the shattered expressions of my son and his wife. And now, I would like all of you to leave my house. When the front door finally clicked shut behind the last of them, a profound silence settled over my house. But for the first time in a very long time, it was the silence of peace. I stood there for a moment, simply breathing it in. The ghost of a Thanksgiving feast remained on the dining table, a tableau of the ruin they had created, a half-carved turkey growing cold, smeared cranberry sauce on the white linen, overturned glasses, and crumpled napkins. It was a perfect metaphor for the family I had tried so desperately to hold together, now lying in shattered pieces before me. David Chen, who had remained behind, gently touched my arm. "Are you all right, Francis?" I looked at the wreckage and then at him, a tired but genuine smile touching my lips. "I am now," I said. "What happens next?" "David." He gestured toward the chairs in the living room, away from the debris of the dinner. "According to Robert's will," he explained, his voice soft but clear, "now that the clause has been triggered, the entire $5 million trust, along with the associated assets, will be redirected. Robert stipulated it should be used to establish a charitable foundation in his name. He paused. The Robert Hayes Foundation for Young Artisans, to provide scholarships and grants for aspiring craftspeople who work with their hands, just as he did. A beautiful, fitting legacy. It was so perfectly Robert. As he spoke, my phone, which I had left on the side table, began to buzz violently, an angry, insistent vibration against the wood. I glanced at the screen. A stream of notifications was flooding in. First, a torrent of text messages from Chloe, a digital venom of misspelled curses and furious accusations. Then the screen lit up with Aiden's name. A call. I watched it ring, the sound an unwelcome intrusion into my newfound quiet. It stopped and immediately started again. I felt nothing. No panic, no urge to answer. I simply picked up the phone and handed it to David. "Would you mind?" I asked. "I don't believe I have anything left to say to him." David took the phone with a grim nod and answered, his voice shifting into its professional, impenetrable tone. "Law Office of David Chen." I couldn't hear Aiden's frantic shouting, but I could see the tightening of David's jaw as he listened. "Mr. Hayes," he said finally, "your mother is not available. All future communications regarding the estate must be directed through my office. Do you understand? Good." He hung up, the silence returning, now more complete than ever. Just then the doorbell chimed softly. It was Eleanor Gable, holding 2 steaming mugs of tea. "I saw the last of the cars leave," she said simply, her eyes full of an understanding that needed no words. "I thought you could use this." We sat together on the sofa, sipping the warm, sweet tea, the rain beginning to patter against the windows again. We didn't speak of Aiden or the disastrous dinner. We spoke of our gardens, of the book she was reading, of the simple, quiet things that make up a life. Her presence was a balm, a quiet affirmation that I was not, in fact, alone. As we sat there, my phone, which David had placed on the coffee table, let out a single, sharp ping. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a different notification. I picked it up. It was an email alert from my bank. My eyes scanned the subject line. "Security alert. Changes to your account co-signer status." I opened it. The message was brief and clinical. "The credit card ending in 4281, for which you were the primary guarantor for Aiden Hayes, has been suspended due to the new security protocols placed on your accounts." The final financial thread connecting me to my son had just been snipped. After Eleanor left, I walked through my quiet, empty house. I turned off the dining room light, leaving the ruins of the feast in darkness. As I stood by the large living room window, looking out into the rainy, black street, my eyes caught a shape. A lone car sat under a streetlight at the far end of the block, its engine off, its windows dark. But I knew that car. It was Aiden's. He hadn't left. And he was just sitting there, a silhouette in the darkness staring at the wreckage he had created. 6 months later, on a bright May morning, I sold the house. It wasn't because Aiden had demanded it, but because I wanted to. The closing was a simple, quiet affair, and as I signed the final paper, I didn't feel loss. I felt the lightness of a bird taking flight. Robert and I had always dreamed of traveling, of seeing Paris in the springtime, of sipping wine in a small Italian village. His life was cut short, but mine was not, and I owed it to both of us to finally live that dream. I am writing this from a small cafe on a sun-dappled Parisian street. The air smells of espresso and fresh-baked croissants. It has been 8 months since that disastrous Thanksgiving. 2 weeks ago, a small, forwarded package from Eleanor Gable found its way to my hotel. Inside was a single letter, the envelope thin and unassuming. The handwriting was Aiden's. My hands were perfectly steady as I opened it. "Mom," it began, the words simple and unadorned. "I'm not writing to ask for anything. I don't deserve to. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. Chloe and I are divorced. The debt, the lies. It all came crashing down, and I saw her for who she really was. I see myself for who I became. I am working 2 jobs now, one at a warehouse and another driving for a delivery service. It's hard work, the kind Dad used to do. It's honest. I think about what I lost, not the money, but you, and I don't know if that can ever be fixed. I just wanted to say I am sorry. I folded the letter and put it back in its envelope. There was no surge of anger, no triumphant satisfaction, only a distant, quiet sorrow for the boy he could have been and a flicker of hope for the man he might yet become. But I felt no regret. My path was my own now. Later that day, I sat on a bench overlooking the Seine, a postcard in my lap. It was a picture of the Eiffel Tower glittering against a twilight sky. I wrote to Eleanor Gable, telling her of the city's beauty, of the kindness of strangers, of the strange, wonderful feeling of being completely untethered. I ended the card with a single sentence. I finally found my home. It isn't a place, it's a feeling. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the ancient city, I stood and watched the boats drift by on the river. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded into a scar, a reminder of a battle won. I had fought for my dignity, for Robert's legacy, for my own right to peace, and in doing so, I had forgiven the one person whose forgiveness truly mattered, myself. I had forgiven myself for not seeing the signs, for loving too blindly, for the pain I had to inflict to finally heal. The cool evening air touched my face and I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. And for the first time in so many years, I felt I had truly come home. As I dropped the postcard into the old mailbox in Paris, the soft clink of metal on metal rang out like a final period on a long and painful chapter of my life. I had finally learned the hardest lesson, that true family is built on respect, not exploitation, and that protecting your own peace isn't selfish, it's survival. This morning, the rich aroma of coffee in my small apartment tasted like freedom. And for the first time in years, it was just for me. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a line to protect your own peace?